I was standing on 5 raw Appalachian acres with creek running cold below and a folded envelope in my coat. $25,000, cash, no structure, no power line within a mile. Most people spend more on a bathroom remodel. YouTube says off-grid costs $300,000 minimum. I've done this 3 times and watched it fail twice. Both times because people followed modern advice instead of old knowledge. By day 12, I'd solved the biggest problem, and it had nothing to do with money. There's one thing the Valley people told me I couldn't tell anyone. I'm telling you. Day 1, early morning, frost on the dead grass, creek noise below, a clipboard in my hand, and that envelope in my pocket. I want to tell you what going off-grid actually looks like at the start, because it doesn't look like anything on the internet. There's no Instagram moment. There's no dramatic reveal. There's just land and cold air and the question of whether you're the right kind of person for what comes next. Most people think going off-grid means buying your freedom. You save up, you find the land, you order the kit, and you move in. That's not what it is. Going off-grid means earning your way onto a piece of ground. The buying is the easy part. What's hard is the sequence, knowing what comes first, what comes second, and what you skip entirely because it costs money you don't have and solves a problem that doesn't exist yet. I had a list on that clipboard, 6 items: land, water, shelter, heat, food, power. In that order, every time, no exceptions. Everything else, the composting toilet, the raised beds, the fancy chicken coop, that's all phase 2. In 30 days, you're building a livable, functional, legal off-grid foundation. That's the job. The first thing I had to settle wasn't on any checklist. The land cost me $3,200. I want to sit with that number for a second because people don't believe it until they hear how it happened. The land that's cheap is cheap because it looks wrong to the wrong buyer. Suburban people and real estate investors are looking for flat, dry, road-accessible parcels with cell service and a pretty view. They're looking for what they already know. So anything that doesn't match that picture gets ignored. Hollow land, wet bottom land, north-facing slopes, parcels with no road frontage, long, thin strips that back up to a ridge, land that's been in a family for 80 years and now belongs to someone who moved to Charlotte and has been paying property taxes on it for 15 years without ever going back. That's where the value is. I found my parcel through word of mouth at a feed store. I'm not going to oversimplify that. You have to actually be in those communities, talking to people before anyone tells you anything. But the information exists. County tax records are public. You can find land that's one step from a tax lien sale and make an offer before it ever hits a listing site. The man who sold me those 5 acres shook my hand and told me he was glad someone was going to use it. His grandfather had cleared the upper shelf by hand in 1947. I walked that parcel for 2 hours before I agreed on a price. Not because I was negotiating, because I was reading it. The tree line told me where the water moved. The moss told me which direction got no afternoon sun. The soil color on the upper shelf told me it drained. That's where I was going to build. Zillow would have shown me that parcel as a liability. To me, it looked like exactly what it was. The land was settled, but the one thing that could end the whole project in 48 hours, I hadn't touched yet. Water. Day 3 through day 5, $800 total, most of it in materials. Here's what people assume. Water means drilling a well, and in a lot of places, that's the only option. In the Appalachian Mountains, it frequently isn't. These ridges are full of springs, gravity-fed, cold, naturally filtered through layers of rock and soil, running all year in most cases. If you know how to find one and cap it properly, you have a water supply that requires no pump, no electricity, no monthly bill, and no maintenance beyond keeping the box clear. I spent day 3 on my hands and knees in wet leaves, following seep lines uphill. That's how you find a spring. Not by guessing, but by reading where the water surfaces and tracing it back to its source. I found iron in the taste of the first seep I checked. Iron taste means the water's moving through iron-rich rock, which tells you something about the geology, but doesn't automatically mean contamination. The test that costs nothing is letting a white cloth sit in the flow for 24 hours. If it stains orange, you've got iron. If it stays white, you're clean at the surface level. That's not a substitute for a real water test, which I did on day 5 for $60 at the county extension office. But it's a fast first read. The spring box itself is concrete block, a gravel filter bed, an overflow pipe, and a gravity line running down to the structure site. The whole installation, including the pipe, fittings, and concrete, cost me about $600. A drilled well in that county runs $8,000 to $15,000. I've seen people burn through a third of their total budget on water before they've touched a single board. Wrong spring cap means contamination. That's not a scare tactic. Surface water contamination from animal activity uphill is a real risk, and the cap has to seal the surface water out completely while allowing the spring to flow freely below it. If you're not sure, bring someone who's built one before. The knowledge is worth more than the materials. Water solved. But the next problem was the one nobody on YouTube will touch. Here's what I want you to understand about those first 5 days. I'd found land and water, the two most fundamental elements of any off-grid setup, and I'd spent less than $4,000. That's not luck, that's reading. The Appalachian method isn't a product line or a YouTube series. It's a literacy. You learn to read the land the way old people read weather, by paying attention until the signals become obvious. The people who fail at this aren't poor readers. They just never learned what to look for, because they were raised to buy answers instead of find them. By the time I got to shelter, I'd spent less than $4,000. But what I built next is the part that'll make you angry. Shelter. Day 6 through day 14, $6,500. People assume shelter means a log cabin or a prefab kit. A kit cabin, nothing fancy, just a basic insulated structure, runs about $28,000 delivered, not installed, delivered. You still have to put it together, pour a foundation, and figure out everything the kit doesn't include, which is most of the important stuff. The Appalachian method is a pole barn frame, 6x6 pressure-treated posts set in concrete, spaced to carry the load. Metal roof, salvage tin in my case, bought off a man who'd torn down a tobacco barn. Rough sawn walls from a local sawmill, not a lumber yard. Insulation from rigid foam boards I pulled from a construction dumpster with the site foreman's permission, and wool bats from a sheep farmer, 2 hollows over, who'd been burning the stuff because he couldn't sell it. The reason it works isn't nostalgia, it's physics. A metal roof sheds water and snow better than shingles. A pole frame doesn't require a full foundation. Rough-sawn lumber is thicker and denser than dimensional lumber from a big box store. Wool insulation doesn't lose its R value when it gets damp, which matters in a mountain environment. These aren't workarounds. They're solutions that were engineered over generations for exactly this terrain. Day 6 was bare posts in the ground. Day 10, the roof went on. That afternoon it rained, a hard mountain rain, and I stood inside the frame and listened to it hit the tin and run off clean. Roof first, always. Walls can wait. A wet frame rots. A dry frame can be finished at your pace. On day 8, a man I'd met once at the feed store showed up with a chainsaw and a trailer. Didn't call ahead. Just pulled up, looked at what I was doing, and started cutting notches in the wall posts for the girt boards. We worked until dark. I fed him supper. He told me he'd heard I was building and wanted to see how it was going. That's the first time I understood what was actually happening in that valley, and I'll come back to it. The shelter was standing. Power was next. And that's where I made the one mistake that cost me 4 days. Power, day 15 through day 18, $4,200, including the error. The off-grid solar industry will tell you solar is the answer. I'm not anti-solar. I've used solar panels for 20 years, but solar alone fails in the Appalachian mountain winter, and the people selling you the systems aren't accounting for ridge shadow. When the sun tracks low across the southern sky in November, a north-facing ridge blocks it for hours. Add ice on the panels, and you're down to maybe 5 or 6 usable hours on a good day, and nothing on a cloudy one, which, in these mountains, is most of them from October through March. The answer isn't more panels, it's a different physics. The same spring that was giving me water had a 12-foot elevation drop between the box and the structure site. 12 feet of head pressure and a consistent flow rate is enough to run a small micro-hydro turbine 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of cloud cover, regardless of season, regardless of whether the sun is up. I bought a used 400-watt turbine from a man in Tennessee for $800, ran PVC down the hillside, built a small wooden housing box for the generator, and connected it to a battery bank. The mistake was in the battery wiring. I connected two 12-volt batteries in parallel when the system needed them in series to reach the correct voltage for the inverter. The turbine was running, the batteries were charging, the inverter was showing the wrong output, and I couldn't figure out why. 4 days of checking connections, testing components, consulting diagrams before I saw it. 2 simple wires in the wrong positions. If you're building a battery bank, draw the circuit before you touch a terminal. Series means positive to negative in a chain. Parallel means all positives together, all negatives together. They are not interchangeable, and the system will not tell you which mistake you made. On day 18, I flipped the switch on a single LED light inside the structure. It came on. First light I'd had in 18 days that didn't come from a fire or a headlamp. Power solved. But I was on day 18, 12 days left, and I still hadn't eaten anything I didn't buy. Every system I'd built to that point had one thing in common. It used the land's own physics. Gravity fed the water. The spring's flow rate fed the turbine. The ridge provided the building material. The thermal mass of the earth stabilized the temperature inside the structure. That's not primitive engineering. That's precise engineering. The kind that works because it's matched to the specific place where you're building it. A solar system designed for Arizona doesn't work in Appalachia. A spring box designed for this ridge doesn't work in the desert. The Appalachian tradition isn't a universal template. It's a method of reading a place and building what that place allows. What came next was the part I almost didn't include, because the man who taught me the next piece told me it was a secret the county didn't want people to know. Food and heat. Day 19 through day 22. $1,800. People assume that going off-grid in the first 30 days means you need a garden established and livestock in the yard. That's a year 2 project, maybe year 3 if you're doing it right. In the first 30 days, you need a wood stove, a cast iron pot, a supply of dried staples, and the ability to identify 3 wild foods that grow in every hollow in these mountains. Heat first. I built a basic rocket mass heater core using salvaged brick, clay dug from the creek bank, and scrap steel from a metal recycler. A rocket mass heater burns wood so efficiently that it produces almost no visible smoke. The combustion is nearly complete before the exhaust leaves the structure. The mass stores heat and radiates it for hours after the fire's out. The total material cost was about $400. A propane heating system installed would have been 4 times that and come with a monthly bill forever. The first fire in the structure pulled clean, no backsmoke. The draw was right. I sat in there that first evening with the stove running, and my breath wasn't fogging anymore, and I ate a bowl of pinto beans cooked in lard with cornmeal bread baked in the Dutch oven. My grandmother fed 4 people on that combination for a week once, during a hard winter, on about $4 worth of raw ingredients. I'm not romanticizing it, it's just food that works. Caloric, filling, shelf-stable, cheap. The 3 wild supplements that every hollow in these mountains provides in season. Ramps in early spring, watercress in any cold running water year-round, and pawpaws in late summer. None of those have to be planted. They grow whether you're there or not. You have to know what you're looking at, and you have to be certain before you eat anything from the wild. But those 3 are distinct enough that identification isn't ambiguous if you do it right. Freeze-dried prepper food kits run $300 per person for 30 days. My food system for the first month cost me $60 in dried staples. The difference isn't sacrifice. The difference is knowing what to use. I had shelter, water, power, and heat. What I didn't have yet was the piece nobody talks about, the piece that makes the whole thing legal or doesn't. Day 23. I heard the truck before I saw it. Gravel road, diesel engine, slow. County inspector's seal on the door. He got out and walked toward the structure the way inspectors do. Not hostile, not friendly, just reading. He asked what I was building. I told him a single-family dwelling on agriculturally zoned land under an owner-builder exemption. Most people think going off-grid means escaping the system. It doesn't. The system comes looking for you, and when it does, the only thing standing between you and a condemned structure and a stop work order is the right piece of paper. I'd pulled that paper on day 2. $85, an owner-builder permit under the county's agricultural dwelling exemption, which allows a landowner to construct a primary residence on agriculturally zoned land without a licensed contractor, provided the structure meets basic habitability standards and is not intended for sale. Most counties in the Appalachian region have some version of this exemption. Most people building off-grid don't know it exists, which means they build without a permit. Which means the first time anyone official sees their structure, it's illegal. The inspector walked through, made notes, looked at the turbine housing box, looked at the spring line, looked at the stovepipe clearance. He asked one question I wasn't expecting. Had I filed the spring as a water source with the county health department? I had on day 5. At the same time, I got the water test done. He nodded, wrote something, told me the stovepipe needed an additional 6 inches of clearance from the roof line, and I had 10 days to correct it. Then he started toward his truck. At the door, he turned around, and he told me something. I'm going to tell you exactly what he said in a minute, because that's the part that tied everything together. The Appalachian off-grid tradition has never been about breaking the law. It's been about reading it. The mountain families who've held the same land for 4 and 5 generations didn't stay there by being outlaws. They stayed there by knowing the exemptions, the agricultural provisions, the owner-builder clauses, the water right traditions, the timber allowances. The law has gaps in it, and the gaps are there because the people who wrote the law understood that rural landowners needed room to operate. Knowing where those gaps are is the secret. It's not underground knowledge, it's public record. It's just information that nobody teaches you unless you know to look. What the inspector told me on the way out pointed me toward the one resource I hadn't used yet, the one that made the $25,000 number actually possible. He told me there was a man named Curtis who lived about 4 miles up the same ridge road who'd built 3 structures on his property over the past 40 years, using salvaged materials and barter labor, all permitted, all legal, and that if I was serious about what I was doing, I ought to introduce myself. Day 24, I drove up that road. Curtis was splitting wood in his yard. 70s, gray beard, work coat with electrical tape holding the left cuff together. He looked at me for a long moment, then pointed at his wood pile and told me to pick up a maul. We split wood for 2 hours before he said much of anything. Then he started talking. The Forbidden Network isn't a secret society. It's not a prepper group or a survivalist collective. It's just the way that Appalachian rural communities have always operated. A web of mutual knowledge and traded labor and shared materials that runs almost entirely outside the cash economy and almost entirely outside any record that anyone would ever look at. Firewood for labor, canned goods for equipment use, a day of work, in exchange for the use of a backhoe. Information exchanged over a meal. The day after I met Curtis, a man showed up at my property with a truck half loaded with rough-cut white oak. He said he'd heard I was building. I'd never met him. I didn't call him. He'd heard from someone who'd heard from someone. And in those valleys, that's how it works. That oak became my interior wall finishing, my shelving, my door frame, and the porch deck. Market value, probably $1,200. His cost to me, 2 weekends of help with his equipment maintenance later in the year. The YouTube off-grid builders spend $180,000 because they never find this network. Some of them can't find it because they're outsiders moving fast with cameras and aesthetic goals. Some of them can't find it because they don't have anything to offer. Knowledge, labor, time, skill. The network is based on reciprocity. You can't buy your way in. You earn your way in by being useful, by showing up, by not needing anything you can't eventually give back. That's the forbidden part. Not because it's illegal, because it means you have to slow down, show up, be humble, and be present in a place for long enough that people decide you're worth knowing. Day 28. I sat at the table I'd built from a piece of white oak Curtis's friend had dropped off, and I laid out everything I'd spent. Land, $3,200. Water, $800. Shelter, $6,500. Power, $4,200. Food and heat materials, $1,800. Permits and county fees, $85. Tools, fasteners, pipe, wire, miscellaneous, $1,400. Total, $17,985. I had just over $7,000 left in that envelope. I'm not going to tell you that number is guaranteed for everyone. Land prices vary. Salvaged materials require either connections or patience. The microhydro only works if you have the right hydrology. But I will tell you that every single place the cost stayed low, it stayed low because of knowledge, not luck. I knew to look for undervalued land. I knew how to cap a spring. I knew the permit exemption existed. I knew how to wire a battery bank, eventually. And I knew that community was a resource, not a nicety. That remaining $7,000 didn't get spent. I put it in a separate envelope and labeled it Winter Reserve. Going off-grid broke is the same as not going off-grid at all. A hard freeze that bursts your spring line, a roof repair after ice damage, a vehicle issue when you're 12 miles from anything. Those problems don't care about your philosophy. The reserve is the last piece of the system, not a luxury, a requirement. Day 29 and 30, I did one thing. I walked the property, every corner of it, morning and evening. Not checking anything, just walking, getting it into my body, understanding where the water moved in a rain and where it pooled, understanding where the wind came from, understanding what I had and what I'd built and what it meant to be responsible for a piece of ground. The $25,000 number isn't a budget, it's a philosophy made visible. It says, spend only on what the land cannot provide. Let the land lead. Follow the water, build toward the ridge, use what's already there before you go looking for what isn't. The money is the tool, the knowledge is the system. On day 30, I sat on the porch I'd built from rough-cut oak and looked out at that creek. And I finally understood what my grandfather tried to tell me 30 years ago when I was young enough to think he was out of date. He never said it plainly. He just kept showing me things. How to read a spring seep, how to tell by the moss which way was north, how to trade a day's labor without ever making it feel like a transaction, how to be useful to people before you need them. I thought he was teaching me survival skills. He wasn't. He was teaching me how to stay, what the inspector knew, what Curtis knew, what that man with the truckload of oak knew. It's the same thing. You don't buy your way off grid. You earn your way onto the land. Land comes first, then water, then shelter, then heat, then food, then power, then community. And community turns out to be the one you needed first all along. I'm sitting here now with that creek still running below me. Same sound as day one. The envelope on the shelf, mostly empty. The light on inside. The turbine turning in its wooden box down the hill. I didn't need everything they told me I needed. I needed the right sequence and the willingness to be taught. If you had $25,000 in 30 days, tell me in the comments where you'd break first. Is it the land search, the water, the permit confusion? Because wherever that break point is, that's the skill you need to build before you do anything else. If you want me to go deeper on any single piece, the spring box construction, the battery wiring, the permit exemption language, the network and how to approach it, drop it below and I'll build a full video around it. Knowledge doesn't need a battery, it doesn't need a signal, and it doesn't depreciate.